Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Teresa Eyring, Executive Director and CEO of TCG, and I use she, hers pronouns. And I am going to give you a short description of myself, which is I'm a short visual description. I'm wearing a light blue, soft, almost twilight blue suit. I have short brown, just shoulder length brown hair. And I am sitting against a backdrop that is white with the name of this convening, which is A Just and Thriving Theater Ecology.
Hello, amazing theater people. I'm Adrian Badu, Deputy Director and COO of TCG, and my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm sitting against a backdrop of a plastic plant and TCG's new mission, which is to lead for a just and thriving theater ecology. I'm wearing a checkered blue, baby blue shirt, and my hair is black with a sprinkling of gray.
Welcome to our 22nd Fall Forum on Governance and today's Trustee and Theater Leaders Summit. And welcome to our first ever virtual Fall Forum. Normally, we'd be meeting in New York City, attending theater, having crack of dawn breakfast and drinking coffee, lots and lots of coffee together. So though we'll miss being in person, going virtual allows us to expand our circle. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome.
And we also meet on Veterans Day. And so we want to honor those who have served our country, especially any veterans we have with us today. Thank you so much for your service.
Before we begin, we want to take this moment to acknowledge the native land that we are on. This is meant to be a moment of recognition and respect, to broaden our awareness of the history of this land, and as a beginning step to showing our commitment to repairing relationships with Native communities. We also want to acknowledge and uplift that some Native folks have pointed out that land acknowledgements have often become an empty and performative gesture by white people and institutions. We recognize that this by no means we should end our solidarity and support of Native communities, nor does it in any way make up for the theft, colonization, and forced removal of Native land and communities perpetrated by this country. I'm currently on the lands of the Wappinger and Munsee Lenape peoples. We put a link to a land map in the chat box, and we ask that you take some time to enter what native land you're calling from in the chat. In your own time, also please review the land acknowledgements there and consider ways in which you can act in solidarity with Native communities and colleagues.
And I'm zooming in from the land of the Lenape people. At this time, we would love to thank our sponsors whose collective support has allowed TCG to produce the Fall Forum and provide greater access to benefit even more theater practitioners. The Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, the Howard Gilman Foundation, the Schubert Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Fisher Dax Association, Theater Planning and Design, TRG Arts, Capacity Interactive, Carol Streeter and Harold Goldstein, Blueprint Advancement, Charcoal Blue, Threshold Acoustics, Schuler Shook, Theater Planners and Light-In Designers, and Management Consultants for the Arts. Thank you so much for your support.
Yes, thank you so much. We'd also like to thank our internal and external BIPOC advisory councils who provided critical feedback in the direction of this Fall Forum. Thank you for your vision and your leadership in this process. Today at the Summit on Governance, we're focused on responding to the We See You white American theater demands through the lens of governance. We begin by offering our deep gratitude to the Black, Indigenous, and people of color or BIPOC organizers for their ongoing labor in creating these demands and holding the field accountable. As a national service organization, TCG must respond to these demands both internally and externally. And so we want to be clear, we expect all of our white colleagues and all our fellow predominantly white organizations that have benefited from white supremacy to join us in this work with your whole hearts. It is our responsibility to hold each other accountable. In the words of the People's Climate Movement, to change everything, we need everyone.
Today, our summit convenes over 300 trustees, executive and artistic leaders. Tomorrow, our circle will expand and will welcome over 400 attendees from a wide variety of professional identities. While our conversation today is focused on governance and the demands, starting tomorrow, we'll move into a space of community building and collective envisioning. Our 4 plenary spaces will invite generative and emergent conversations around 4 themes: joy, community, accountability, and the question, what do we mean by just and thriving? This last session emerges from TCG's recent strategic planning process with the Yancey consultant, where we clarify TCG's mission to lead for a just and thriving theater ecology. A core part of achieving that mission is our commitment to centering BIPOC theater makers in all of our programs and services going forward. We will discuss this mission in our final plenary and share more in the months and years to come. I strongly encourage you to check out our community agreements for our time together on Mighty Networks and message TCG if you have questions about what they mean or you would like to offer any additional agreement. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Corinna Schulenberg to lead us through an exercise of grounding and centering. Corinna?
Thank you, Adrian. I'm Corinna Schulenberg, she, her, hers. I'm on the lands of the Canarsie and Munsee Lenape. I'm a beautiful, middle-aged white trans girl with long, wavy brown hair that needs a cut. And I'm wearing a white shirt with a pink diamond pattern in front of our Fall Forum logo slide with that plastic plant. I'm so grateful to be in community with you all today. 2020 has been a hard year. There have been victories, possibilities, unexpected joys, but also grief, stress, anxiety, and all these things live in our bodies. We're carrying them with us now. And so this meditation is an invitation for us to honor those things, but not be captive to them, and to be as wholly present as we can in our time together. So please, make sure you're comfortable. Turn off your camera if you'd rather not be seen. Get whatever pillows or support your body needs, and find your connection with the ground. It could be through your sits bones, if you're seated on the ground. It could be through your feet, if you're seated on a chair or standing. Find that connection with the ground. And then if it's comfortable for you, close and relax your eyes and breathe. Feel the air on your skin. Notice the good feeling of the fabric of the clothes, the pillows, the blankets on your body. And breathe. And now I invite you to choose a theater space that you love. It should be one that's familiar to you. Imagine you are present in the audience of that theater now. It doesn't have to be an indoor theater. It doesn't have to be a traditional theater space at all, just one you love and know well. Picture it in your mind. Look around a bit and breathe. Now I invite you to imagine a moment from this year, something from your own life, a moment that feels, oh, so 2020. It could be a significant moment, one of joy, one of protest, one of loss, if you feel ready to hold that in your mind. It could also be a simple moment, multitasking work and parenting, a virtual board meeting, a meal. And now I invite you to imagine that moment being staged in the theater that you are in right now. Imagine the brilliant work of the scenic designer, how they've shaped the space for your 2020 moment, how the lighting and sound designers made the mood of your moment palpable. Bring your attention to the loving details of the costumes, the props. Notice the expression of the actors, how this moment of yours lives in their bodies. And breathe. Now bring that attention to your own body, your body that is witnessing this imaginary scene. on the stage of a theater you love. Be gentle with your attention to your body. Be curious. Nothing needs to be fixed right now, but healing begins with attention. Let's give our bodies that attention. And breathe. And now I invite you to imagine strike. We are going to strike this moment from 2020 that you have imagined on the stage of a theater you love. Picture the people you love from your theater. They're all there. They're taking down the scenery. They're rehanging the lights and sound, folding the costumes, putting the props away. As you imagine this moment coming down, breathe. Imagine the smiling faces of your coworkers, your colleagues, the staff at your favorite theater, your friends, as they finish strike. And breathe. Now imagine the theater is empty again. You're seated or standing in the audience. Notice the possibilities of that empty space. Smell the fresh coat of black paint, if it's that kind of theater. Feel the presence of what shows may come. Anything could happen. Breathe in that possibility and hold that breath for a moment. And now let it out. As you're ready, open your eyes, turn on your video cameras, shake out whatever needs shaking out. We are present with each other. Let's give each other the gift of our curiosity, our attention. And now I'll hand it back over to Teresa.
Thank you so much, Corinna. That was really amazing to think back and have that opportunity just to breathe as we get started. Today is about governance, and so we'd be remiss if we didn't hear from TCG's own board chair, Nicole Salter. Nicole's vision has been transformative throughout the strategic planning process for TCG, particularly as we've moved into reimagining our own governance ecology. Her leadership is a reminder of how important it is to center the voices of artists, and in particular BIPOC artists, at the governance level of our organizations. It is too often the case that our artists, without whom our theaters would be forever dark, are often the most vulnerable members of our theater ecology. And today, amid this pandemic that disproportionately impacts BIPOC communities, they are facing severe economic precarity. Having Nicole's artistry guide our board has been so wonderful, and I'm thrilled to hand her the mic to share her thoughts and lead us into our opening session. Nicole?
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Adrian. And thank you, Corinna, for that. Just took me somewhere. Let me tell you, it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. I appreciate you. And the entire TCG team. I see Devin. I see, who else do I see here? I see no one else from TCG, but I know you're all here. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to be a member of the board of TCG. I'm happy to be a member of the larger theater worker community, and I'm glad to see you all here. I do have something prepared. Do you remember your first run-in with the concept of governance? The first time you realized that someone or something had the power to make the decisions that determine what you could do and ultimately what you would experience? Was it a parent saying, as long as you live in my house, you'll obey my rules? Was it a sibling insisting, I'm older, I sit in the front? Was it a list of chores on the refrigerator or rules at your school? Was it your kindergarten teacher saying it's nap time, sweetheart? When did you realize that you couldn't do what you wanted to do, that there were rules and traditions and norms, that there were acceptable ways of doing things and conducting yourself, that there were some people in charge and others were not? I can't think of the first time I came to know or accept this reality of in chargeness. In fact, that terminology is only just now striking my ear as incredibly militaristic. Charge, in charge. You've been charged. Interesting. Perhaps the fact that I can't remember speaks directly to how intrinsic the concept of governments is to our indoctrinated being. For while I can't think of the moment when I realized that there were powerful forces of governance, people making rules and enforcing them without my input, times against my will, but often for my best interest. But I can think of sometimes that the concept of governments has become much more apparent and strange to me. I've recently written a piece for the Black Theater Commons exploring revolutionary theater. And in it, I challenge the reader to consider that the move to decolonize our processes and infrastructures is a task requiring much more of a deep dive than we may think. For the linear, consumptive, transactional, exclusive, exploitive, depleting mindset that underpins our culture will continue to sprout fruit in our ways of governance, despite any pruning offered by reform. So go with me. I remember being in my Spanish 2 class at Palisades High School with Senor Casacado. He was a very demanding teacher when it came to in-class participation, and he had little patience for the kind of students who still needed to translate English to Spanish before replying to his questions. Do not do the mathematical translations in your mind. Think Spanish and speak, he'd yell passionately in Spanish. But I couldn't meet his demand to save my life or my participation grade. Think Spanish, think noun before adjective, think pronoun before verb. See, the worldview, the values, the perceptions, the underwater cultural iceberg upon which the English language is constructed had and still has me entrenched. I am not una chica intelligentsia. I'm an intelligent girl. Intelligence goes first, and first is more important. First is winner. First is best. How can I just now up and change my mind and make the girl part first without a bit of mental delay? You're asking me to acknowledge the person before the quality. You're asking me to change the way I look at people and the world. And you're asking me to do it without having to do the math of it all in my head? You're insane, senor, I thought. See, I was a dutiful student, diligent, gold star. I memorized everything. So learning English grammar steeped me intrinsically in a mindset that underpins the language itself. It programmed me to accept, without even thinking, that there are subjects and objects in the world, the acted and the acted upon. That is the English normal. So if we here today are considering taking the opportunity offered by the massive heartbreak and disruption of COVID-19 on our lives and work, if we're considering taking that opportunity to uproot the values and perceptions tied to a consumptive, exploitive, depleting, linear, exclusive, hierarchical, and transactional worldview, one might ask, how are we to do so in a language whose very structure supports that way of thinking? TCG is in the midst of that exact mire. And as we allow our new, beautiful mission to lead the activities that allow for the emergence of a just and thriving theater ecology, on whose outcomes are regenerative, interdependent, fair, inclusive, and in alignment with the truth of nature's cycles, you can bet we are often steering directly into the root of the cultural iceberg, where all of our racist and colonial governance policies are sharply enshrined in ice. Nobody here, no individual artist or institution wants to be the Titanic. But one could ask, what does it matter if the racist and colonial underpinnings of our industry are making us all sink anyway? So, how does a field embrace consensus models of governance in the presence of state and federal laws that legally dictate the organizational structure and board responsibility? How do we take on a new business model and a fiscal designation that embraces paternalism and of wealthy donors? How do we champion inclusion with a narrative that producing BIPOC work and embracing BIPOC audiences has a risk that no one could afford, especially during a pandemic? And yet, we will be able to collectively experience the joy of a just and thriving theater ecology. But can we do it without embracing and taking on and championing and bucking the assumptions that underpin our very way of thinking? As we continue to face the inequities laid bare by COVID and the latest uprisings resulting in the disproportionate murder of Black and Indigenous people at the hands of those in charge, our need to uproot the values and misperceptions that have led us to eating this bitter, bitter fruit is ever more imperative. So today's conversation is not a conversation about reform. Why not? Because I'm in charge. See how insidious? Anyway, I digress. Today, if you allow me to facilitate our conversation with Alison de la Cruz, Tara Moses, and Harold Stewart, we are dedicating it to opening all of our minds and hearts, for the aforementioned indoctrination is not limited to the white cisgender population, but opening those minds and hearts to the options we have for governance models beyond the racist and colonial models we've had. And we've dedicated this conversation to inspiring the fortitude, courage, curiosity, rigor, collective strength, and commitment necessary to manifest this new or ancient experience in our reality. With that, I will have our distinguished panelists introduce themselves, starting, I guess, in alphabetical order. See these rules? These rules, man! With Alison de la Cruz.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Hi to everybody. Hello to friends and colleagues who are gathered here today. So great to see your names in the participant list. So great to see blips of your faces as I scroll through gallery view. I just want to appreciate Corinna's grounding and just invite us all to take another breath. Thank you, Nicole, for that open. That was like amazing. So yeah, my visual description is that I'm sitting in front of a Filipino malong that with floral patterns and in beiges, blues, and reds. And I'm also wearing a white polka dotted blue shirt with black hair and flecks of blue. I'm coming to you today from Tongva land here in Los Angeles. And I want to also say thank you to veterans for their service and sacrifice. I'm Alison de la Cruz. My pronouns are she, he, they, and dela. And I'm an executive arts leader, producer, facilitator, educator, multidisciplinary theater artist, contemporary ritualist, cultural space instigator, and gathering practitioner. And I name all those things because that's what I bring into this work. I've had an opportunity to work at the intersections of dramaturgy, adaptation, and youth development, generative processes, community organizing, and dialogue. I've had over 10 youth arts plays produced. I'm also an executive art leader and have worked at companies like East West Players and Pasadena Playhouse. I'm also an ensemble theater company member. Most recently, I served as VP of programs at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center, where I helped to advance our theatrical work in Aratani Theater, and served as the executive producer of Allegiance, a co-production between JACCC and East West Players. And also the transition of our mega space to a black box where we premiered a piece called Tales of Clamor. So excited to be here. I'm also a board member of Network of Ensemble Theaters. And part of what I bring to this conversation and reflection in our prep is I have been co-signed by TCG's advancement programs. I am deeply appreciative that I was an emerging leader of color for many years. And so a lot of my conversation is informed by my weavings in and out between TCG, Lord Theater environments, member company environments, and community-based producing and practitioners. That's how I would introduce me.
All right. I've realized Allison, that you follow the rules and I don't. My name's Nicole. I'm an African-American woman of beauty with the smile of my mama. I'm wearing a white shirt with a Caribbean blue background. My pronouns are she, her, or hers. I'm calling from Lenni Lenape land, and I too support veterans because most of the men in my family are veterans. Now for Miss Tara Moses.
Awesome, Mado. He's Jay Hekti, Tara Moses Joho Chief Kados. So hello everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Tara Moses. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a citizen of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. I am also Muskogee Creek, and I am calling in from the Muskogee Creek Reservation and the site of the 1921 massacre of Black Wall Street, or what was formerly known as Tulsa, Oklahoma. In regards to my visual description, I have very long blue-black hair. The blue is reflecting today, which is exciting. I have light brown skin. I'm wearing a gray v-neck with these amazing earrings by a Dene artist. Follow on Instagram. The handle just left me. I'm so sorry. I'll put it in the chat later. Anyway, yeah, and so in regards to my institutional affiliations, because apparently that matters in the hierarchical structure, I am the producing artistic director of Tilla Tulsa. That is Oklahoma's first and only theater company specifically dedicated to Latinx and Native artists and their stories. I am a co-founder of Groundwater Arts alongside Annalisa Diaz, Anna Lathrop, and Ronnie Pinoy, who is Laguna Pueblo and Cherokee. And we do a lot of consultation work, community building work around the Green New Theater, and lots of other cool things. So check us out. We are cool. Yeah, and I am also a freelance director, playwright, dramaturg, you name it, I got you, boo. And yeah, with that, super excited to be here. So thanks.
Thank you, Tara. You got us. Lovely. Now we have Mr. Harold Stewart.
Greetings. Again, my name is Harold Stewart. My pronouns are they and he. I'm sitting right now in the lands of the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, and Wampanoag, also known or referred to as Boston, Massachusetts. I believe, or at least I want to be your image of all that is Black and sexy, right? Our present and our future. What that looks like for me today is I think I have on a herringbone kind of earth tone little cap, polka dot black and white scarf, a black t-shirt that actually has a member of our board on it, Lakia Mandela, right there looking fabulous. Some of my, I think, considerable considerations for this context is that I am executive director and cultural strategist for the Theater Offensive here, which is a queer and trans people of color organizations with an over 30-year history in Boston. Not always people of color by mission, but definitely by desire and work. I teach at Emerson, I teach theater studies, and that's exciting because I haven't fully developed the ability to say no. I sit on a lot of boards and committees, and some of them include TCG, where we have fun, and kind of, so that's not necessarily one of the no's. But there's also Mass Creative, which is our cultural policy organization here in Massachusetts. The National Performance Network is a national service organizations for performance and presenting a world. And I also sit on a steering committee for the Black Theater Commons. So hopefully that gives me a unique perspective. And then I never shout out my personal work. So right now, as like a theater scholar, I'm working on a book called Can I See That Banji Stage that helps kind of bring to our consciousness the queer trap aesthetic in American theater. So excited about that.
That's exciting. Thank you guys. So, well, we got some heavy hitters here to guide us through the think tank and the conversation that we're trying to elicit from the field and all of you here about governance and what it means to decolonize and change the way in which we make our decisions and assert our power within our institutions and within our communities. I'm going to ask each of you, when did you realize what the governance structure of the American theater was? And what was your response at that realization? Go back, back, back.
I can go first. I would say as a young person growing up on the left coast and west coast and seeing theater as always something that started in New York or was claimed by, often in my young perception, solely by New York. I think as I discovered that theater was the path that I was on, I realized pretty early that the people who make decisions, I wasn't going to go into an audition room. I wasn't going to go a traditional route. I wanted to be grounded in places where there were more people of color. And so I would say by the time I was 21, I realized I had to become a producer in order to navigate, because I didn't trust that decision-making structures would value the stories that I want to tell, or the body that I'm in to tell those stories, or the bodies that I wanted to put on stage. And then also realizing that I would just say my last real moment of that was a discovery at the TCG conference in San Diego, and realizing I no longer want a big white American theater to pay attention. I feel sorry for you that you don't know where I'm from, that you don't know the communities that I built with, that I've grown from. And I've just made that decision to be like, all right, I need to keep making the work I'm going to work. I'm going to make, and invite people to join me when they're ready, join us when they're ready. And that actually drastically shifted a lot of my practice, even though it had already been in my practice for almost 20 years. So I would say pretty early, I realized, oh, theater is probably not a place for me based on what I saw in external messaging and product.
I would say most of my career as an arts administrator was not in a nonprofit setting. It was at the South Dallas Cultural Center, which was owned and operated by the city of Dallas. And, you know, as a city employee, who you're accountable to and how, and who you take your direction from, it kind of shifts, right? So the city was our governance structure, and the people who we were kind of serving. And so that's really, as a young arts administrator, what I knew, right? And then I got invited to be on the board of the National Performance Network, again, as a young administrator towards a career path and trajectory. I hadn't served on a board before. And even then it was different, right? It was like professional development. Like, I'm just trying to get where I can fit in and, you know, try to say something relevant so they don't think that they made a mistake. But I had to kind of find it and kind of really learn. But those were two different entities in terms of boards and governance. When I came to the Theater Offensive, you know, I inherited a board and we grew a board in terms of American theater specifically, and then serving on TCG board as well, is when I began to understand, okay, this looks and feel different because of like the context of who we are and what we're serving. And definitely coming to these convenings, like the governance convenings, is where it was like, all right, there is this thing called a board. It can look different, it can feel different, governance can feel different. This what feels uniquely American theater, and it doesn't necessarily jive with my city governance structure or people governance structure, or even MPN at that time. But that's when I started to realize that, oh, there are actually different ways of doing this. And I'll also uplift, you know, I'm a member of Alternate Roots, which has one of the most profound governance structures that I know. So, you know, just being a member, you're also a member of the board, and the executive committee really holds down the executive work. So I had all of these different frameworks coming into a more formalized, so to speak, American theater framework.
Tara?
Yeah, for me, very, very early, because in my community, in my communities, we have, you know, storytelling. We've been telling stories since as long as the sun's been in the sky. And theater, especially like where I grew up in Oklahoma, was a very separate, very elitist, very white field. And so when I stumbled into it on accident, there was just always this divide of like, okay, I'm doing this Eurocentric thing over here. Because, you know, I live here in the city now. And so this is the closest I can get to like a community when I'm not down in Seminole Nation. Anyway, so they were just two very separate entities. And then that was also reinforced in my university training. I'm used to being the first Native person in the room. And at my university, I was like the first Native student they've ever had. And so when I asked about, you know, other Native artists who do theater, my professors who are all professionals working in the field were like, well, you're the only one we know. And yeah, it was interesting, you know, as an 18-year-old. Anyway, but I knew that couldn't be true. And so went through my entire university experience not knowing of other Native artists. Wasn't until I stumbled into like our campus basement, like library, which is where the scary area was, where you didn't go. And I found an anthology of William Yellowrobe's plays. And I was like, wait a minute. I know Native artists exist because this anthology was written in 1975. Yeah, and then from there, really the curiosity peaked. But then following university, I had 2 fellowships at Arena Stage, and that was a very enlightening experience for me. Realizing that the quote unquote storytelling or like the folk art or whatever that my communities and my people do is theater, is just as fine, is just as valuable, is just as culturally relevant. And yet that was not being honored in the way that we create, which is a very relational model, which is how I still create as a freelance director. And that's how I write in my plays, etc. That wasn't supported in large institutions that I found. And so I call it the Great Awakening. Being on the balcony of, if you've ever been to Arena, the beautiful balcony by the cafe, out there with another fellow, Chicamani Benes, we love him, having a conversation. And he was just like, no, this is because we're brown people. And I was like, what? It was just like, you know, the fog has cleared. And I was like, wait a minute. So we don't have to stay within this model. And he's like, no. And I was like, all right, we're not gonna. Anyway, yeah. And so since then, I feel like that Great Awakening moment drastically shift how I create, which is now very unapologetically within the Indigenous traditions that I was brought up in. That is empowering, that is relational, that is circular, that is non-hierarchical, and it works. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm very, very grateful for Jeremiah, who's an amazing queer Latino director. So if you're looking for one, he's amazing.
You give shouts out to everything. I'm going to have to give you my Instagram handle to take with you wherever you go. I wanted to offer mine because I'm going to add an individual artist's perspective. I actually probably have many, but the one that came to mind after listening to you came after my experience within the continuum. I played so many roles in the creation and performance and execution of that work that I gotten very used to being a part of conversations with theaters about community development and audience development and community engagement, as well as the work itself with all of the designers, with everyone. And I remember going to my first gig that was not mine, the one that I, got hired from an audition for. And I was like, well, where, you should, I often shoot myself in the foot by starting my sentences that way. What you should do is go over to this community and engage them in this way and invite them to the show. Because when I'm performing, I look out in the audience and I don't see nothing but white folks. And I got this look like, girl, if you don't know your lane, like you are the help here. Just perform, chick, and go to the housing we've provided you. You have no business in this conversation. And why would you think that you did? And I was like, oh, I have a lane that I have to stay in if I want this job and people to like me. Interesting. Power. I want to double back to something that you just said, Tara. As we are talking about the different ways in which we can engage governance in our institutions. You, in our previous prep conversation, you all talked about consensus models, but you also talked about a relational model. Can you talk a little bit about ways in which you've bucked this colonial, hierarchical, paternal board of donors with other models that look different? This is for all of you, by the way.
Yeah, sure. So to kick this off, whenever we hear the word consensus, so I have found is that that means a very different things to very many different kinds of people. Because all of us have a definition of consensus, whether that's coming from like the, colonized English version of what that is, which tends to be, majority rules and then we bully the rest. Or if that comes from your own cultural practices and your own communities. And so consensus means very different things for different people, just based on where you come from. And so in my communities, consensus is every single individual being empowered to speak however long they wish to speak in regards to whatever decision is at hand. And these conversations go on until a decision is made that 100% of the people in the room agree. And those decisions can last, like these conversations can last 30 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks. It doesn't matter, as long as every individual feels motivated and empowered by the decision. And so, I was raised in that. It's quite funny being in like tribal meetings and having toddlers in the room who, again, are also part of this consensus process, and they get as much time as they wish also to the decision, which is great. And so when it came to like leading Tela Tulsa or leading Binge Theater Company back in DC when I lived there, operating on a true consensus model was sort of a learning curve for members of my board. And the majority of our board are BIPOC folks. But again, it's because since we live in this white supremacist country and in this field that has been plagued by white supremacy for so long, where like the Eurocentric way of telling stories and the hierarchical model is the standard, there's a lot of unlearning that we need to do. And so what's really great is that in our governance structure is built on that circular consensus model, where there is no one individual who puts forward their plan and that's what we do, et cetera, et cetera. And this works because we think of each other as relations. And so we are not colleagues. We are in relationship with one another, with the communities we serve. And the communities that we serve and are a part of also include the land, the water, the air, not just our audiences, not just our fancy donors, but literally every single individual and like entity and being. And so whenever we think of our communities that relational way, and we just realize how large that is, I cannot prioritize a donor or one individual stakeholder or one individual corporation or foundation. Absolutely cannot, because I have all of these other individuals I have to be accountable to. And I really call that like, value-led organization. And that's not just like on the governance level, but it trickles everywhere. So example, in rehearsals, because we work relationally and because time is a relation, time is relative in that way, and that they are a relative, as I know, Nicole, you've heard me say, and other folks, we take our equity breaks when we're supposed to, of course. However, we're not limited to that harsh 10 minutes or that harsh 5 minutes, because we give our collaborators the time they need to actually rest in that moment. And so we are gentle with them, just like we are with a relative. We're gentle with time, just as we are with our grannies who need more time, get out of the car. We're not upset with them, we give it to them. And so it's quite wild. Love our stage managers, quite wild for them. But sometimes, those breaks take 45 minutes, they take an hour. We just have a conversation, but the work still gets done. And because everyone is motivated and empowered, it is so much better. And we get everything done before we need to.
And that's the fear, right, Tara? That's the fear that time is money. Here's a value that we all have been trained to hold. Time is money, and we can't waste it away. It's also seemingly antithetical to our ideas of freedom. Like, we can't wait for all these people to contribute. I can do what I want to do. Finding the balance between your individual expression, desire, and want, and the needs of the group. It's a very, I think, challenging thing for a more Western mindset.
Mm-hmm. But I can tell y'all it works, I promise.
I think for me, if we're just jumping in, Nicole,
Mhm.
that's how we're playing this game.
Yes, ma'am.
So for me, I love what you said, man. I love you so much. So it was about the decision to come to the theater offensive. So in the interview, there was a question about, have you worked with boards? How do you work with boards and things like that? And the theater offensive, I was much of a risk for them as they were for me, because I've never thought I was a Black woman. I've been raised by them. All I know is like Black woman strategy. And when I learned about somebody named Shirley Chisholm, that was like my mantra. I'm unbought and unbossed. Like I'm like, how are we gonna do this? Because you can't pay me and you can't boss me. So I needed to really figure out what our relationship would be, right? And it was around like supervision and accountability and things like that. Because the theater offensive, I'm used to all Black spaces or a different type of diversity, and the theater offensive had, white board presence, white founding, and things like that. So it really was a quality conversation around how does the board work and how should we work. And when I got there, and I should say at the theater offensive, we haven't dismantled the system that, in terms of a normative board structure. We've just figured out a way to work with it, with a different set of values, right? As most oppressed people do. It's kind of like there are Black productions of Shakespeare, right? They just have a different type of cultural relevance. We do not do Shakespeare. So we have this board structure still that we're still interrogating, but again, we led with a couple of values, and white supremacy and dismantling white supremacy. If that's a cheap value, then we constantly interrogate the struggle. And if it looks like a white supremacist way of being, then it's like, okay, how do we, correct that? But for me, because I'm a Virgo, so I had to be like, well, why? I can't move forward unless I have clarity. What is this really about? Like on a basic level, right? Because we're metaphysicians, like what is the basic call of the board, right? And when I got to fiscal management and some other kind of just management and governance on like a basic level, right? I was like, okay, so why all these problems? Why all of these controls and things like that? And then, as a student of history, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay, I get it now, right? There's been mismanagement, not necessarily in our organization, but historically, when we look at theater, mismanagement, business plans that have failed, right? As well as like miscommunication and things like that. And I was like, well, that's not me, right? And it seems like if I understand the trajectory of American theater, these seem like unique white distrust and governance and dominance issues that you're trying to put up on me. So let's
Mm.
let's operate with high levels of transparency, right? It's like so can we get at that and talk about the systems that we need, because we have to admit, the distrust hasn't always looked like me, even though you want to make it seem like it was my problem. The business models that are failing or succeeding, or like they're on this roller coaster, are not uniquely what I created, but so I'm not going to own those problems, right? So I look at these things for like opportunity and culture. And then we got basics of like job function. So this is what I understand I'm supposed to do. And your board responsibility, this is what I understand you're supposed to do. So how do we do that honors each other in this kind of relational model? And how do we liberate ourselves? When I came to the theater offensive, like I know some of my colleagues here, we inherited organizations. So our founder was going on a sabbatical 5 months after I was there. So I had more questions for the board than they had for me. Like, where were you when this decision made? How does this make sense? And for them, it was their own self-evaluation in terms of what they were participating in and how, right? So I think we kind of started at a place where we could kind of recalibrate how we wanted to build our relationship and our responsibilities and go forward, again, amongst values, amongst trust and things like that. And I'm more transparent than anybody I know, and things get to you before they could ever, come out in some kind of secretive way. But, I'm a Virgo, so let's clarify it, let's stick with it. And I also approach the work, with a amount of rigor and hard work. So if you're going to be on the board with the theater offensive, you got to match my hustle, right? So those are some other things where board members are like, either we're going to step up, reposition ourselves, or kind of move together. But but that Shirley Chisholm piece was a real struggle, because I was like, I'm Velma Body's grandson and Betty Jean's son, and I got a mouth. So if anybody, I'm famous for saying, like, I looked at my birth certificate yesterday and your name was not on it. So I just don't understand how you get to think you can control my life. So what is the relationship going to be that's kind of different, and what are the components of that? And I love our board. We have a lot of fun together, and we take the work that we're doing serious, and we move from this framework of like we're governing and managing, because they know like you can't boss Harold. That's a sure sign of like conflict and drama. So what is it then that we do? We both steward this work in partnership, right? And that stewardship framework is about, okay, a particular type of calling and a different set of qualifications and a different approach to it that feels good for this moment.
Allison, you have anything to add?
Yeah, yes. So I just want to appreciate everything I've heard, and then just echo and lift up and name, like, in addition to white supremacy challenge that we're talking about, we're also talking about, and you all named it in different ways, but we're talking about capitalism. And I feel like the other reality is that a lot of creative theatrical environments I've been in, live performance environments, there is always this juggle between what is our relationship to white supremacy and pushing against that, what is our relationship to capitalism and capital. Like, I know so many of us in this Zoom room probably know how to make a lot of stuff out of not a lot or out of nothing. And I feel like what I want to name is, I realize in hearing this conversation, so many of my non-theatrical environment experiences or environment experiences in theaters of color is about displacing that relationship between white supremacy and capitalism. And like Tara was saying, it is about more time. Time is relative. It is about relationship. It's not a linear process. And I realize in my storytelling and facilitating practice, I've had to name to folks, yeah, when you come to this project, when you come do Fandango Bon, it's a circle, it's relational. So it's gonna take more time. And a lot of what I started to notice in the diverse communities I was working in on that project is there are people who are abstract thinkers and relational and circular kind of folks, and then there are these linear folks. So watching that rub also feels very relevant to me about the conflict and governance, because I feel like a lot of governance activity is about staying on task, staying on time, achieving a perfection or achieving a bottom line, achieving a certain set of accolades for the production or the season. And so I just named how that got really hard, and that gets really difficult, especially in this paradigm shift that a lot of us have been in or are in. And so it's like, yeah, what are my income streams? How do we be stewards of this organization that we care about? And yes, I would hold up what I'm saying about, like, yeah, who's defining the success of our productions? And I'll just say, as somebody who was taking a musical property that existed, that was performed in New York, and trying to talk with folks about bringing it to LA and what it meant for us in the API community to do this production. A lot of conversations were about trying to shift people's paradigm and their relationship to even get the board to even see this as a potential opportunity. And so I guess I feel like the other thing I want to say is, in talking, I realized that I've been in a lot of organizations where there are working boards. So I also want to name, there are some boards where all you get to do is governance. That's awesome. But there are lots of orgs of color and intersectional diversity boards where it's like, I'm a board member and I'm the fundraiser and I'm the chair of the side project, da 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 da. So I just also want to name, like, even as we think about how we engage those folks who are on our boards, that there is even a difference in the field about the work that gets put in by people on boards. And so I would invite folks who are on boards to consider, like, yeah, who is doing the work of your board? Is it a diverse group of people? And then the last thing I want to say is, I acknowledge having worked in multiple kinds of theatrical and creative and community-based producing practices and places, that even in people of color-led boards, this is still an issue. And I'm not trying to put our business out, but I am also trying to acknowledge that within ourselves, within what we expect, that sometimes when the cash flow is not there, the panic becomes, we have to go back to white supremacist capitalistic behavior in order to save our organization. And so I feel like there's multiple boxes that we have to help ourselves come out of. And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I also know part of the shift in bringing a show from New York to LA to really have it get the audience it needed meant that we built in a lot of time. We maintained that process, we thought about it. And a couple different people were like, oh, do that like consensus organizing thing you did, or do this kind of community project. And I'm like, it's not just a thing, it's actually the process. So if we're really committed to shifting our audiences, if we're really committed to shifting our practice, then we have to shift and we have to change and we have to really accept that it's gonna be hard and it's gonna be icky and it's gonna push against that, because we're trying to get to a new thing that doesn't, in certain people's minds, exist yet because they can't imagine it. So I would just add to the mix that part of this process is about not just saying that we want to change, but it is being willing to imagine the scariest, not at a risk management level, but maybe at a risk management level too, like the scariest thing outside of the box, just like we would devise site-specific stuff. Diversity and inclusion and governance to me is site-specific devising of how to combat white supremacy and capitalism.
And I just want to say really quickly that I know this is not the panel to name those things, like to get to the specifics, but you do have generations of people who don't know the specifics, right? So we're inheriting these structures. And when you look at the nuances of what largely white dominant boards were able to do, again, try to figure out ways to save growing organizations through dominance, right? In a misogynist world, find a place for the wives to, have some kind of relevance. I've heard things like that, right? How to have a competitive edge for our corporations by branding and things like that. So I think we have to, at some point, name those things so we know what we're trying to change and why the structure was so, it is the way that it is. And this great opportunity when, I thought this morning that like the best of white effort did not save whiteness or dominance. What a unique opportunity now to say, let's throw it all out and let's, envision something else, because you tried, you dominated, like you ruled, you used influence, you erased. And then there were some other things, like I agree with Allison, even cultural ways of being. There are things when we're rebuilding governance structures, and I say stewardship structures or whatever is relevant for you all, to say what from our diverse body of being feels like we want to move forward with. I'm looking at the collectives of the 60s and 70s that Black people did, or, the relationship between we did our art in the Black church or the YMCA. Like we had all of these things before we bought into this nonprofit model that's worth investigating and saying, okay, how then did we sustain ourselves? How did we grow? Right? How did we value, how did we not have a single narrative about governance? And how did those who were charged with this responsibility, it felt like a calling versus, something else, and you approached it like you were born to do it.
Mm-hmm. There is a kind of reverse engineering that could also happen with like a return to the mission. Like, who are you serving? What do you want to give them? And what is the best way to go about distributing those services and governing the institution that is helping to deliver those services, kind of working backward? I think might be an interesting way of looking at it, of flipping the mindset, which often starts from governance. This is the governance we need. And then whatever the outcomes are, we'll justify because this is the power we want to maintain. I also have a question to you guys. For those people who are online with us who are thinking, this sounds so ridiculously idealistic, and God bless y'all for wanting to give everyone a voice and spread power amongst the artists and artisans and theater workers and dismantling places where theater is and coming up with your own measures for success. Like, isn't that cute? What do you say to them to encourage the kind of paradigm shift in the thinking that will allow something like this to actually emerge? Because as you said, Allison, like if we can't envision that it could be different, it can't. What do you say to encourage and inspire and promote the kind of rigorous thinking, the curiosity, the deep dives that need to happen in order for us to really unroot the assumptions that are inherent, as I said in my opening, in our very language themselves?
My initial response to that, and just to say, the only reason the stuff exists now is because a group of people over time decided to shape a set of situations so that they could manage the things that they loved and wanted to manage. So it exists this way, not because this is the right way, or forgive me for the racial pun, the white way, but so we all have the power at this moment to decide this is the shift, so let us shift. And we have to believe that it can change because humans created this thing. And I guess the last thing I just want to call in is that, you know, there's a quote about how in Indigenous communities, it's about obligation to folks who've come before, folks who've come after, and not about entitlement. And I feel like that really resonates with how I approach this work. And I appreciate what you held up, Harold, that it is about stewardship. I do not do this work because I feel entitled to tell a story. I do this work because it is my obligation to help set a set of creative and imaginative spaces for myself and for the people who came before me. But I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm thinking about the babies who haven't even been born yet, and how I cannot pretend that this is the only way it can be done, because those young people, those future elders, they need us to set something different. And so to me, my thing is just, we are the imaginers, and it's about us making the decision that this is not the only way. This is the way it's been. And so what happens when we say, what can it be?
Yeah. There's also something about the word effective. Well, what you're saying sounds interesting, but the most effective way is the way that we've been doing. What do you guys say to that, Tara?
Effective according to whom? Because I can think of hundreds of thousands where the answer is it's not been effective whatsoever. So that, and what I would also offer, you know, more positively or more upliftingly, so to say, is that and a lot of this uncertainty and anxiety about like change, what the future can be, and like, will it work, et cetera, will I have to quit my job, et cetera. What I love to offer folks is that we're not reinventing the wheel. The wheel's already been invented. There are wagons, we got trains, whatever you want, we got wheels. And that if you look to the global community, if you look at BIPOC individuals like across the planet, these structures have already existed for thousands upon thousands of years. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to open up your purse, number one, but also number two, to look towards the wisdom, the collective wisdom and experience of BIPOC folks in this country and across the planet. We've already done this, y'all. It's not that difficult. Just a roadmap's been made. There's so many of them, so many different versions. It's just really opening that trust and knowing that it's going to work out, because it has for thousands of years. So what I like to offer folks. And then the last thing I'll offer, just a little bit more cheeky, but have to name it, is that this desire to say, this is what the community needs, I must keep hold of this, et cetera, that's just an act of ongoing settler colonization. And I don't think y'all want to be part of that. So stop it. So I like to say. Anyway, that's my little cheeky side to it. But again, very earnestly, there's so much community, so much wisdom within this community that can help lead us forward. So join us is what I want to offer.
My mother would say, I can show you better than I can tell you. And that'll be the teacher. And Toni Morrison said that the function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. Amen. So if I've accepted this responsibility as my work, right, I'm not going to let racism be the distraction. And you can just, follow me as much as you can and kind of see what happens. And what I'm taking inspiration from is that, you know, I am a Black gay man in 2020. I've always been told what I can't do and what I shouldn't do and how I should do things. And yet here I am. So doubt for me is the motivating factor. So I would say, well, thank you for telling me I can't do that. And again, pay close attention, right? You know, stay engaged, right? It's not going to be easy, but here we go. But I'm watching now my colleagues, BIPOC in leadership, do this work, right? You know, so we're seeing it. So pay close attention and don't try to disrupt it. Take note, right? You know what I'm saying? Learn something, study something, right? I'm also looking at movements like the Movement for Black Lives, which is the largest global movement in the United States that talked about a lot of, we can't defund the police. That's not even in like our psyche, but yet and still it's becoming more of the norm than it is. So I don't work from a place of doubt as like a barrier. It's like the motivator, but you know, you got to pay close attention and get out of the way at the same time. But as Tara has said, it's already been the crazy thing is that we're using old school methods now. We're not even doing anything new. It's like if I could get to the new stuff, but I'm having to resort to what I told you we should have been doing in the first place, and you silenced me, right? So things like that. So you haven't even really seen the magic yet. And when we take our focus off of white American theater, right? So right now we're making time, we're making space, we are accommodating, but collectively, when we say we're gonna leave you to your own failures and ignorances and barriers, and we're gonna do what we know to do, like we've done it. Like I don't get people that survive in America 400 years based off of some white strategy. It's like the knowns and it's the secrets, and it's that iterative approach that's like, oh, this is what freedom looks like, and this is what like innovation and forward movement look like because of what we value. So I just say, you know, and you can join, right? You know, I think people of color, this is the other thing. We're not an exclusionary people. Like if you look at our history, we are the most inclusive people in the world. I almost got in trouble because I almost let this white boy post about the theater offensive. I was talking about being inclusive, that like I have images of my foremothers with white babies on their nipples. So it's like, you know, we fed white children. So how do you think now we just want to kill and destroy them? Like that is your narrative. So again, you can join us in this effort if you choose to, but it's about understanding that the Theater Offensive, when we changed our mission to be a people of color organization, this question of whiteness came up. And I said, you know, we don't know, but what we can be invested in, and on the board level, it came up, what is the strategic place of white people in our organization? And how do we qualify that strategic place of white people in our organization? So again, as we're thinking about the how, you know, it's like, okay, what is your strategic place in watching people of color do it?
Yeah, we've seen these revolutions before in our field and in other fields and in our world at large. And what's interesting to me about this particular moment, seeing you, Allison, you, Tara, you, Harold, and me, and the people on this call, is I feel like in the past, these efforts have been fought within the silos of our individual people of color communities. And we have an opportunity here in our field to unite with one another because we've actually never done it together across the board, everyone here. So I'm really excited for what the field has to offer and seeing so many faces here online. I had one more question. I don't think I have time for it, but I'll ask everyone just to consider and maybe write in the chat. That way I can still get it in. We are, as has been said on this panel, stewards of the narrative of America, what it means to be American, what our worldview is, what it means to be alive in the world from our vantage point. We are stewards of that narrative, and that narrative determines where we place our focus and ultimately what we do, right? So as we at TCG are moving our mission to lead for a just and thriving ecology, to take stewardship in that way, what does that look like to you? What does that mean to you? And what needs to change in the governance structures you occupy in order to manifest that just and thriving ecology? In the chat, go. All right, we have exactly 20 seconds as you guys continue to write. This is a bit of call and response. Feel free to continue to respond. I wanted to thank you all. Allison, thank you. Tara, thank you. Harold, thank you. TCG staff, thank you for these witnesses. Thank you for these words of wisdom and encouragement in this moment of paradigm shifting transition for our field. I hope that this conversation encouraged you to have one in your own community, in your own institutions, with your own friends, with your own families, because while COVID has been a destructive force in very many ways, there is an opportunity here for us to seize a restoration of alignment with nature. I'll just say that. Thank you guys.
Thank you,
115. Thank you
Nicole.
so much. I'm segueing you back to our executive director, Teresa Eyring, who is coming back. Yeah.
I am coming back. Thank you so much, Nicole. We're going to seize this moment for restoration and alignment. And I'm going to hand it to Adrian.
Chair Nicole, thank you. Tara, Allison, Harold, thank you so much for your generous offering to not only us, but the field. I implore the almost 300 folks on this Zoom call. This plenary was recorded, and will be shared. Please share with your boards and your staff. It's a generous offering from our panelists to spend and share time with you this morning. Thank you so much. Just a quick housekeeping item. Please bookmark Mighty Networks. It's the one-stop shop to gather all information about the Fall Forum over the next couple of days. You can also use it to share resources with your colleagues and also communicate with Theater Communications Group if you have any questions or anything. So thank you so much. Teresa?
Thanks, Adrian. We also want to share this very super duper fun way of sharing ideas and reflections with the whole Fall Forum. The amazing Alex Maida has given us this online whiteboard tool. She shared it with us. And I'd like to encourage you to put 2 or 3 reflections from the day on the whiteboard as you go through the day. And this will help us to share all the great work that happened here with those who will be joining us tomorrow. All you need to do is double check on the whiteboard and share your thoughts. Double click on the whiteboard and share your thoughts. That's all for us, and we'll see you soon. Our next sessions begin at 1:30.